This week in wrestling history, we got a packed one this week. Holy smokes, we got a big week. And we're going to start 29 years ago this week. New Japan Pro Wrestling's annual January 4th Tokyo Dome tradition began. In 1992 with a joint WCW New Japan Super Show headlined by Sting and the Great Muta against the Steiner Brothers. It wasn't until 2007 that it would be rebranded as Wrestle Kingdom, which has become New Japan's version of WrestleMania every year. It always takes place on January 4th, regardless of what day of the week it might be. And now, of course, it's the last couple of years, it's been two nights back-to-back, January 4th and January 5th. Wrestle Kingdom 12 in 2018 featured an IWGP United States Championship match between the champion Kenny Omega and the challenger Chris Jericho. Jericho had not wrestled for New Japan since 1997. Been a long time since he had been there in the Tokyo Dome. Don Callis helped broker the deal. He is friends with both those guys. He was doing commentary, Callis was, at the time for New Japan. The match did big business for the company. It got them a lot more subscriptions to New Japan World. And Tony Khan, and Jericho talks about this, I'm sure Jericho loves talking about this. He talks about this almost as much as he talks about being the only man to beat Rock and Stone Cold in the same night. But Tony Khan credits that match as the catalyst for the idea to eventually start what would become All Elite Wrestling. 28 years ago this week, on January 9th, 1993, Bret the Hitman Hart beat Ric Flair to retain the WWF Championship in a 60-minute Iron Man match at the Boston Garden, which Bret won 3-2. A Saturday matinee, part of the first of two double shots they pulled that weekend. Bret pinned Flair later that night in Portland, Maine. And the next day he beat him again in a matinee in Lakeland, Florida. And then later on that night in Orlando. But there was some drama before the Boston match backstage. In his book, Bret says that he came up with what he thought was a good finish for their match. He ran it by Vince McMahon. But then when he went to go tell Ric Flair, Flair started telling Bret what they were going to do instead. And so Bret cut him off, and he chewed him out in front of the locker room, in front of a bunch of the wrestlers that were sitting around, and told him, hey, Rick, I'm the champion. This is how it's going to go. And he says that Flair's jaw dropped. His face turned red, I guess from embarrassment. And he just sat down on a bench, did Flair, and said, you're the champ. He says Flair managed to mess up the timing for every single fall in the match. And Bret was pissed when Dave Meltzer in The Observer said that Flair carried him for the entire match when it was the other way around. Bret hated Flair's routine. Every single match, the Flair flop, the flip over in the corner. He always thought Flair was very overrated. The two of them have never liked each other. If you read their comments in their respective books and other comments they've made about one another, they've worked together plenty of times. They had some really good matches. And maybe today, they're older. Maybe they'd be more complimentary of the other. They probably get along okay. It's not like they can't be in the same room together, but you just from their comments, you know that these two have never really liked each other. But I want to read you real quick what Meltzer said in the January 20th, 1993 issue of The Observer, because I had to go see for myself. I mean, did he actually say this? And what did he say that pissed off Bret so much? But this is what he said about the match in The Observer. He said, the match was said to have been a classic. We received 9 reports from the show. 3 of the 9 gave it 5 stars. Another gave it 4 3/4. Another gave it 4.5. All of whom pretty well indicated that it was the best live match they had ever seen in years. According to one source, Flair thought it was the best match he was involved in during his entire WWF stay. Bobby Heenan made a rare appearance at ringside as a manager. First fall went to Bret in 27 minutes with a rolling reverse cradle. Flair came back to win falls 2 and 3. During the second fall, Heenan distracted the ref and Flair used the chair. Heenan was sent to the back. Flair won fall 2 with a figure 4 and fall 3 with a figure 4. Bret evened it with the sharpshooter. At this point, Heenan showed up again, handed Flair a gimmick, which he hit Hart with twice, but both times Hart kicked out, and when Flair went for the figure four, Hart cradled him for the 1-2-3 to go up 3 falls to 2 with 1.5 minutes left in the match. So I'm not sure where Bret read that or where Meltzer may have said that, but sounds like a pretty positive review to me. There is fan cam video of the match that is out there. At least at one time I know it was on YouTube. If you want to go seek it out, the match never did air on TV. Which is interesting because the WWF title match where Bret won the championship in Saskatoon never aired on TV either. I'm not sure why none of their matches never aired on TV. That one ended up on a Coliseum video. 26 years ago this week, on January 7th, 1995, the WWF was taken by storm by a newcomer, making his debut on WWF Superstars in a match taped 1 month prior. The man himself, or I should say, half man, half tar. Oh yes, that's right. I'm talking about Mantaur. Brrr! That's the Mantaur bellow. I just debuted a new Mantaur super chat during our YouTube streams if you want to hear me do the Mantaur bellow. I don't even know why I did that on the New Year's Eve stream. I just happened to let out a Mantaur fucking mating call like that. I don't even remember why I did it. So I made it a new super chat. I had no idea that this week was the anniversary of his big debut. How's that for timing? The man behind the mask, or headdress, I'm not even sure what you would call it. It was a giant bull's head. The man was Mike Halleck, who had wrestled as Bruiser Mastino before this. Unfortunately for him, he came in at a time when Vince McMahon may have been on some hallucinogenic drugs. I don't know, but 1995 gave us Mantaur, King Mabel, and an evil Santa Claus from the South Pole. So, need I say more? He debuted on Superstars against Walter Slow, and he was referred to as the Minotaur. That's how he was announced to the ring. He was called the Minotaur. So I don't know exactly when he got the Mantaur name, but he was supposed to be half man, half Minotaur. Jim Ross, bless his heart, tried to explain this on commentary during one of his later squash matches by saying that his name was Mike. So he acknowledged that the guy's name was Mike and that he had been bullied his whole life, hence the bull's head that he would wear to the ring. That is bullshit. But nice try. I know Jim Cornette managed him a couple of times. He thought Bruce Pritchard was ribbing him the first time that Bruce came to him and said, "Hey, you're going out there with Mantaur tonight." But no, he was serious. But by the summer of 95, Mantaur was gone. Very sad. They did bring him back, though. Not Mantaur, but they brought back Mike Halleck briefly, very briefly, to be a bodyguard the following year for Goldust. And he even bumped for the Ultimate Warrior. After Warrior's match with Goldust, if you could even call it that, at the In Your House pay-per-view in April of 96, there was a match. I think it was for the Intercontinental title. It was booked between Goldust and the Ultimate Warrior. And Goldust, I think, had a knee injury, and so he couldn't really work. So they weren't really able to have a match. It was just a lot of stalling and kind of standing around. But I guess Halleck was there, and he took some bumps and got body slammed by the Ultimate Warrior, and that was it. They should have just had him out there in Goldust Corner as Mantaur. 23 years ago this week, on January 8th, 1998, the debut episode of WCW Thunder premiered on TBS, a show that Eric Bischoff absolutely did not want to do. A lot of the Turner executives above him did not want to do the show either. They knew that it would be overkill. They knew it would burn out Nitro and the whole WCW product. And they knew also it would create additional work for them and their production team that they really did not need. But it happened because of one man. And it just so happened the one man who wanted the show was the only voice that really mattered. And that was Ted Turner. WCW had such a huge year in 1997. They were riding high. They went from being the black sheep of the Turner Empire to their Golden Goose, and Turner thought, well, if Nitro is such a success for TNT, then let's replicate that on TBS with Thunder. Now, Bill Burke is a name that you may not be familiar with. Bill Burke was the president of TBS, and so he heard Ted Turner say the same thing, we got to do Thunder. But then Bill Burke went to Eric Bischoff, and he made it very clear that we're not paying for it. We, TBS, we are not paying for this show. So you're going to have to find another way to fund this thing. So Turner, I mean, think about it. What Turner basically said was, we want you to do this live 2-hour television show every week, which live television is not inexpensive. It was not inexpensive back then, and it sure as hell isn't inexpensive today. I think I remember reading it was like every episode would cost anywhere from $350,000 to $450,000 per show per week. But I want you to do this show, but you're going to have to find a way to pay for it. That's basically what happened here. Bischoff knew it was going to dilute Nitro, and now he had to go find a way to pay for it, which they didn't have the money to do, so they ended up having to add more house shows to try to offset the cost of the show and raise money to pay for the show. That was an issue because a lot of the top stars in the company, all the names that you would figure, in their contracts, they had a cap on the maximum number of dates that they can wrestle in a given month or in a given year. So all of a sudden, you're going to have all these live events that you expect people to pay to come see. And what are people going to want to see when they come to these shows? They're going to want to see the names. They're going to want to see the big stars. So they were in a situation where they had to run these shows, and they did not have access to a lot of the top names that people would actually want to pay money to come see. So the whole thing was a disaster. He said, more than anything, this is what Bischoff said, more than anything, more than guaranteed contracts, more than the Fingerpoke of Doom, he claims that adding Thunder is ultimately what really gutted WCW. Now, his original idea with Thunder was to do what WWE later tried to do with its own brand split and create two warring brands from within. The NWO would take over Monday Nitro. Remember that I talked about that last week, the NWO Nitro experiment. That was a fucking failure. But that was his original idea. That's why they added so many people to the NWO to the point of absurdity, because his idea was, we need a roster of people who will be on the NWO show on Mondays on TNT. So you need all these NWO guys because you need a roster for the show. And then WCW would have taken over the Thunder slot Thursdays on TBS. Well, that was the original plan per Jim Ross that Vince McMahon had in mind for the invasion and the brand split in 2001. They were going to give WCW Raw. And WWF would have taken over SmackDown on Thursdays. They were already drawing up creative plans for it when they had the match in Tacoma with Booker T and Buff Bagwell, and Vince McMahon just ended up blowing the whole thing up, and that was the end of that. They did the invasion angle for a few months, and that was it. Probably for the better. But anyway, that was the original plan for Thunder and Nitro that Bischoff had in mind. 22 years ago this week, on January 4th, 1999, one of the biggest nights of the Monday Night War era, a famous night, an infamous night for WCW. On a taped episode of Monday Night Raw, Mankind beat The Rock to win his first WWF Championship, which had been taped the week prior. The year prior, technically. Over on TNT, Nitro was a live 3-hour show from the Georgia Dome in Atlanta. And at the order of Eric Bischoff, Tony Schiavone, he gave away the results of the Raw main event, and he bashed Mick Foley. He was mocking his title win, and that sent 600,000 viewers fleeing Nitro over to Raw so they could see a world title change on USA. On Nitro, Goldberg had just seen his undefeated streak ended at Starrcade by Kevin Nash. He had been beaten for the first time. He lost the WCW World Championship. And so tonight was going to be the rematch from Starrcade between Goldberg and Kevin Nash. Nash was the new champion tonight. He admitted that Goldberg got screwed at Starrcade and he was going to defend his title against him in the main event. But when Goldberg got to the building, he was arrested on charges of aggravated stalking that were filed against him by Miss Elizabeth. And so as Goldberg is taken away to the police station, which, keep in mind, is right across the street from the Georgia Dome, who should make his grand return as Goldberg is being escorted out to the police station? Who should come in but Hollywood Hogan? Hollywood Hulk Hogan making his first appearance since announcing his phony candidacy for President of the United States back on Thanksgiving Day. Hogan cuts a promo on Nitro. He calls Goldberg a sexual deviant. By this point, Hogan was leading the heel wing of the NWO. Nash was leading the cool wing, the red and black, the Wolfpack. He says he wants a match with Hogan if Goldberg can't make it back in time for the main event. Nash will defend his title against Hogan if Goldberg cannot make it back. Hogan says he's going to win the title and he's going to retire as the world champion. We get to the match. Now remember, the police station is right across the street from the Dome. Not just that's how it is. They even acknowledged it on TV. Okay, it's not a big secret. The police station is right there. Once they realize that Goldberg is innocent and they're going to let him go, he demands to be taken back. He demands to be driven back to the Tokyo Dome. That's gonna be a hell of a drive if they want to drive him to the Tokyo Dome. He demands to be driven back to the Georgia Dome, which is right across the fucking street. So we are supposed to believe that in an hour or a half an hour, however much time he had to make it back in time, he needed a ride. He couldn't cross the fucking street. So he doesn't make it back in time. Nash and Hogan are in the ring, circling one another. Hogan pulls back for a big strike, big punch he's going to throw. But instead, he lightly pokes Nash in the chest with his finger, and Nash took a bump like he had been shot by a sniper on the roof. And Hogan pins him, and we learn that it was all a ruse for months. All of this drama within the NWO, it was all staged for the purposes of getting to this moment to get the title back onto Hogan. The NWO is united again. Finally, Goldberg makes it back into the Dome. It's too late, though. They all beat him down. They leave him for dead. That's how they end the show. The old bait and switch on their big championship main event, including all of the people in the Georgia Dome that night who paid for a ticket to be there to see Goldberg challenge for the title against Kevin Nash. They had 40,000 pissed off people in the building that night. And some people credit this angle as the downfall, or the beginning of the downfall of WCW. Although if you believe Eric Bischoff, it goes back a year earlier to the debut of Thunder on TBS. Everybody's got a different answer for what the downfall of WCW was. How's this for an answer? All of the above. All of the above. It was not the downfall of WCW, but it did speed things up. Nash told Sports Illustrated a few years ago, he goes, how else were we going to put together a heel factory for Goldberg to run through? The only thing that had any validity was the NWO, and the plan was to have Goldberg go through everyone. He got pissed off and then eventually got hurt, but that was the original plan. So that was his defense of the Fingerpoke of Doom angle that night. I've seen a lot of people, Disco Dipshit being one, among others, who have talked about Goldberg stupidly putting his fist through the limo on Thunder and injuring himself as the reason why the angle had to be killed. And that it was Goldberg who killed the entire thing by hurting himself. Goldberg did have a minor knee surgery in May or June. I forget which. It was either May or June. Many months after this, he had a minor knee operation. The limo incident, this is what people don't understand. People don't have access to a fucking calendar, apparently. The limo incident didn't happen until the end of the year. After his Starrcade match, where he kicked Bret Hart in the head and ended his career. That was December of 1999. This happened in January Almost a full year earlier. People make it sound like the limo incident happened a few weeks later. It happened almost a year later. But they conflate these events. It's like they think that the limo incident happened immediately after or within a few weeks of the Fingerpoke of Doom. That is not true. That is simply a lie. That is not the case. The revisionist history on this is ridiculous, and it needs to stop. Goldberg did hurt his knee, but he was gone for maybe, I think, 2 months. And that wasn't until the summer. He wrestled all the way through May. He beat Scott Hall. He beat Kevin Nash. He also beat Bam Bam Bigelow in a match on pay-per-view. They sent Goldberg to the Tonight Show a month after this, a month and a half after this. They sent Goldberg to the Tonight Show with Jay Leno to issue a challenge to Stone Cold Steve Austin, which Goldberg supposedly did not want to do because Goldberg actually had a fucking brain in his head, and he realized that it's going to make me look beneath this guy if I'm the one going out there groveling for a challenge. You know, hey, acknowledge me. It's going to make him look beneath Austin. And he was right. But he did it anyway, and he looked like a fool. Austin didn't take the bait, because why the hell would he? Why would WWE even acknowledge it? All of this happened after the Fingerpoke of Doom. So to hear certain fans and even hear certain WCW guys who worked for the company, in the company at the time that this was going on, to hear them talk about, I mean, maybe they took too many chair shots to the head and their brains were a little bit fogged up. They talk about an injury that didn't occur for another 11 months as evidence of Goldberg screwing up their plans. None of this excuses what they did on Nitro that night. They fucked up. They fucked up, and they pissed a lot of people off. And they squandered whatever goodwill they may have had with a lot of those people. Now, they still did a 5.0 cable rating that night. Raw did a 5.7, which I think up to that point may have been an all-time record for Raw. These are the days when Nitro and Raw, they were combining for a 10 or an 11 audience every single Monday night. This was the peak. WCW would only see that 5.0 mark 3 more times after this, and one of those times was only because the Dog Show bumped Raw, so Nitro got to run unopposed that night. After that summer in 99, 4.0 would become a distant memory, and by the following spring, little over a year after this, they dropped as low as a 1.8 rating. That is how hard and fast the once mighty WCW fell. 20 years ago this week, on January 7th, 2001, the original ECW held what would turn out to be its final pay-per-view event, Guilty as Charged, at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City. Nobody at the time knew for sure that it was going to be their final pay-per-view. Some talent and people suspected it might be, possibly. I mean, the writing was on the wall. They had just lost their TV slot on MSG Network in New York. They canceled their February pay-per-view date, but they were still promoting March 11th as the date for their next pay-per-view. Wrestlers only got half their pay for the show, which put many of them as many as 7 weeks behind on pay. But Paul Heyman was still insisting that the company was not going to shut down. So I can imagine the look of surprise on a lot of their faces when he showed up unannounced as Jerry Lawler's replacement on Raw 2 months later. Hey, that's Paul. What's he doing on Raw? On the show, Rhino pinned Sandman in 60 seconds to win the ECW World title after Sandman had just won the belt in a 3-way match. It was a 3-way tables, ladders, and canes match. And RVD beat Jerry Lynn in an impromptu main event. Just Incredible and Steve Corino cut a promo to end the show announcing themselves as the new Impact players, but we never did get a chance to see that alliance play out because ECW filed for bankruptcy 2 months later. Of all the promotions, the one that you would think would go out in a blaze of glory instead went out with a whimper. 19 years ago this week, on January 7th, 2002, so exactly 1 year later, Monday Night Raw aired live from Madison Square Garden, featuring the return of Triple H, 8 months removed from tearing his quad. In a Raw match with Steve Austin against Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit, he returned to a gigantic babyface pop to announce that he was entering himself into the Royal Rumble match, which he would go on to win. Still one of the biggest ovations in Raw history. It lasted so long they had to loop his entrance music. And that very same night, Brock Lesnar and Randy Orton, who had yet to appear on TV, each made their MSG debuts in dark matches, with Lesnar beating Rico Constantino and Orton beating Ron H2O Waterman. There's a name I haven't heard in a while. Ron H2O Waterman. You know, people love to poke fun. I see it on social media all the time. Oh, Kevin Nash tore his quad at this comment. They love to poke fun at Kevin Nash for tearing his quad that one time, while completely ignoring the fact that Triple H tore his quad twice. He tore 2 quads. I don't see people talking about that. In fact, that second quad tear came this week as well, 14 years ago at the New Year's Revolution pay-per-view. Also, in a tag team match, it was him and Shawn Michaels against Edge and Randy Orton. He tore it, giving Orton a spine buster. But hey, props to the guy. Unlike Nash, and look, I don't cast aspersions on anybody. I'm sure that's a very painful injury. If I tore my quad, I'd be curled up in the fetal position crying bloody murder. Nash didn't finish the match when he tore his quad. To his credit, though, Triple H, he finished the match. Now, maybe that wasn't the smartest thing for him to do. I'm sure it didn't feel too good. But credit to the guy, he did both times. He finished the match. He was determined to finish the match. 15 years ago this week, on January 8th, 2006, WWE presented its second annual New Year's Revolution pay-per-view, headlined by an Elimination Chamber match for the WWE title, with John Cena defending successfully against Shawn Michaels, Kurt Angle, Kane, Chris Masters, and Carlito. After which, Edge became the first person ever to cash in Money in the Bank that he had won almost a year earlier at WrestleMania. 280 days he held on to that briefcase. He cashed in and he defeated John Cena to win his first WWE Championship. The very first Money in the Bank cash-in, which led to a live sex celebration on Raw the next night with Edge and Lita that featured some accidental nudity, which is, of course, edited out of every single version now that WWE airs on the network or their YouTube channel. But I remember, there was some accidental nudity under the covers that night from Lita. Ratings went up. Sure, a lot of things went up during that segment, but ratings went up for the few weeks that Edge was champion. He defended the title on Raw in a great TLC match against Ric Flair, better than it had any right to be. I mean, Ric Flair at that point in his career in a TLC match, but they had a great match. Didn't stop them, though, from putting the title right back on John Cena 3 weeks later at the Royal Rumble. On Talk Is Jericho years ago, Edge said that he knew it was only meant to be a short-term thing. He knew that going in, and they had their plans. But when they saw how well things were going, he said they could have easily dragged it out to WrestleMania 22. And he could have dropped it right back to John Cena on that show. And he's absolutely right. But then Lord Helmsley wouldn't have had an opponent that year. And we can't have that now. Triple H had to have his match. Now, he did put John Cena over in that main event, and that was a big deal to see Triple H, top name in the company, put John Cena over clean in the middle, tapped out. I mean, look, that was a big deal. But it's just a shame that Edge's run, which it was doing well, it was resonating with people. It did not have to have the plug pulled on it that quickly, but they had their plans, and they were going to stick to their plans. 11 years ago this week, on January 4th, 2010. We talked about January 4th, 1999 as being a big night in history. This was also a very big night in wrestling history. This was the return of the Monday Night War, or as I called it at the time. God, how long have I been doing this podcast? Jesus Christ. But yes, at that time, I referred to it on the podcast as the Monday Night Skirmish, which I think was a better description of what this really was. Not really a war, more of a skirmish. With TNA Impact, which aired on Thursdays back then at that time, they were airing a live 3-hour special on Spike TV opposite Monday Night Raw. Dixie Carter had signed Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff to come to TNA, and they were making their debut on TV that night. Kevin Kay, the president of Spike TV, said the plan was to air quarterly specials on Mondays throughout the entire year, but if the ratings for the show were strong, they could potentially move Impact to Mondays on a permanent basis. Vince Russo, who had lingering issues with Hogan and Bischoff from their time together in WCW, he was writing TNA television at that time, and the three of them met before the show. I don't know if it was that day or in the days before, but they met together before the show to put their differences behind them. Not only did the show feature the debuts of Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff, it had the debut of Ric Flair. It had returns for Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, Sean Waltman, Sting, Jeff Hardy, all of whom at one time or another had been in TNA. And debuts for Val Venus, under his real name, Orlando Jordan, and the Nasty Boys. WWE countered with the return of Bret the Hitman Hart, making his return to Raw for the first time in 12 years. This is the first time Bret had done anything on Raw, anything on TV, other than the Hall of Fame, with this company since the Montreal Screwjob. So this was a big deal that Bret was coming back on Raw that night as the guest host. And TNA made sure, these bastards made sure, I don't blame them, but as a fan it was very frustrating. They made sure to time Hogan's entrance right at 9 p.m. when Bret Hart was walking out on Raw. I stuck with Bret, but I had my finger on the remote in a way that I hadn't done since the days of flipping between Raw and Nitro. So you think about it, it's like, oh, that's kind of cool, but when you're actually doing it, it's fucking frustrating as all hell, right? Because you don't know what to watch. You don't want to miss anything important. I don't think I had DVR back then. I never had TiVo or anything like that. So I was still, at that point, I was probably still relying on VCR tapes. It was very frustrating. But on Raw, Bret Hart called out Shawn Michaels, and the two of them buried the hatchet in the middle of the ring. Later on in the show, he confronted Vince McMahon, who kicked him in the balls, left him laying to end the night. Raw easily won the night, which was no surprise. 3.6 rating to Impact's 1.44. 5.6 million people for Monday Night Raw, viewers, I should say, for Monday Night Raw, which, it's so sad. It's so sad to even compare it to today. I mean, my God. My God, they trot the legends out. They trot the legends out on Monday night this week, and what did they get? Did they even break 2? I don't even think they broke 2 million. I think it was 1.8 or 1.9 for Raw Monday night, for Legends Night. It's pathetic. And 2.2 million viewers for Impact, which was Impact's largest ever audience, even to this day. They've never come close to that ever again. They peaked. Think about this. Impact, okay? And think about where Impact is today. Impact peaked with 3.36 million viewers at 9 p.m. when Hogan made his entrance. And so it was that Spike decided to move Impact full-time to Mondays, opposite Raw, starting on March 8th, which turned out to be a complete disaster, with Impact's ratings dropping 7% from its previous year's average before the move to Mondays. They actually lost audience on the move that I don't think they ever got back. And by May, they were forced to tuck their tail and move back to Thursday nights. And finally, 8 years ago this week, on January 9th, 2013, Big E Langston defeated Seth Rollins in a no disqualification match to become only the second NXT champion in history, in a match that was called by Jim Ross and William Regal. It's one hell of an announce team. And that is this week in wrestling history.